morning. We have a great crowd here this morning. I appreciate all of you coming. As Robin said, it's the first of our legislative briefings, and we have a couple of more on various issues. We hope you'll come back for that. And really appreciate all the electeds that are here this morning. I know we have Jane Jolly from Senator Corker's office, Bob Griffiths from Congressman Douglas' office. If you're an elected official, raise your hand. Wow. We really appreciate all of you being here. We've got City Council, County Commission, various and sundry other folks. So it's a great topic, a lot of interest in transportation. All of you who've read anything in the paper or watched any television know that we have transportation and infrastructure issues in the state of Tennessee. We haven't had in the past, because Tennessee has really had the finest highway system in the country. I think we still do that, but we do have issues with funding. And in the past 6 months or so, the governor made a statewide tour to talk about the issues of funding and what our needs were. And then there was a legislative group that came around and did some events as well to talk about the role of the legislature in funding. You also know that there is a surplus in this year's budget, and there's been a lot of talk about that and how that could impact the highway fund. So those kind of issues, we're going to talk about what the needs are statewide, what the needs are particularly in our area. Steve, we want you and Jeff to address that. And then legislatively, do we have a solution, and what's being done currently in the session. So I think what I'd like to do, I'm going to introduce these folks first. I think Jimmy Matlock, as Alan said, is the chair of the House Transportation Committee. He's from down in Loudoun County, and owns Matlock Tires, just a little plug. You know, you got to give him a plug. He got up early and came, right? And Jimmy serves on Calendar of the Rules and Insurance and Banking Committees as well. Eddie Smith is from Knox County. He was first elected in 2014. He's a Republican. He's a member of Transportation Committee as well as Education, Administration, and Planning Committee, and he does chair the Knox County delegation. Jeff Welch. Jeff, hold up your hand. Jeff has served as director for the past 30 years of the Knoxville Regional Transportation Planning Organization. It's a TPO. That's what we know. He coordinates multimodal transportation planning process for the Knoxville area, including the urban area around here, Anderson, Loudoun, and Sevier. Steve Borden is on the end. Steve is the regional director of TDOT, the guy to call when your car falls into the pothole out here. He oversees the TDOT operations through 24 counties in East Tennessee region. You know what TDOT does, so let's get started. Now, if you have questions while these folks are talking, feel free to raise your hand and let's make this a serious dialogue, because I think that's what makes these legislative briefings fun. You get to ask what you want and have some interchange here. So let's start with Steve. Why don't you give us an overview of what the needs are? Phones off. Everybody take your phones off. Why don't you give us an overview of what the needs are, because I think that was really shocking when the governor went out and talked about $6 billion worth of needs that TDOT has. And then, Jeff, maybe you could talk a little bit about specific to your bailiwick that you control, and then we'll talk about some legislative issues that are going on. But Steve, talk about where we are, what we need.
Okay. All right. Well, and that's one of the things I know a lot of you have got to see the governor as he did some of his listening tours when he went around, and that was one of the things that we needed to identify as a department. One thing, we have $6 billion of backlog projects that are existing good projects that we're trying to work our way through, that are on the backlog, just trying to get funding to them and work through them. But as we went through the listening tour, there were also another $5 billion worth of needs that were identified in communities. You know, you go to a community and you guys live in your community just like I live in mine, and some of the best resource that we have is from our representatives who are contacted by folks that they represent that help us identify, hey, we have a need. It may be a safety project. Obviously in Representative Matlock's area, we've had 2 of them that we've been able to correct very recently, and as well as Representative Smith on Alcoa Highway, we had one. But as you go in those communities, it was staggering the amount of needs that were beyond just the backlog that we already recognized, projects that we're looking at, and the challenges that are there. You're dealing with obviously congestion mitigation, just the increase in the amount of traffic. We saw a trend line probably around 2008 up until around 2014. Vehicle miles traveled kind of went flat. But over the last year and a half, it has spiked and has a steep incline right now, much faster than the last 30-year trend line. Some of that's probably with fuel economy and prices. People are taking longer trips now, so their vehicle miles are growing. But we obviously know we have those needs. You also have multimodal needs with communities. Changing the character of those communities where people are using more of pedestrian, bicycle facilities, integration of those things into the transportation system. But as far as needs, there are a lot of things out there, a lot of great projects. Obviously, I bet if I went around and talked to everybody here, if somebody has a project in their area that, hey, this is an important project, where are we at on it? And there are a great number of needs that were identified. And there's a lot of challenges. East Tennessee, for me, I have the East Tennessee area. This is home. I was born and raised here. And we have unique challenges here. When you look at the cost to maintain the road in East Tennessee and the cost to construct a road in East Tennessee and the number of bridges that we have, our expense per lane mile is much higher than the rest of the state. So that's a unique challenge. So when we go to improve a transportation facility, whatever we're adding to it, where it can be multimodal access, whether it's adding additional lanes, whatever that is, it typically is a very expensive project. You try to develop a strategic corridor, and there's a lot of different things that you look at. You're not only looking at congestion mitigation, you're not only looking at safety, you're looking at economic opportunity as well, to opening up places where they can be able to have economic growth. You also have strategic corridors. We find that out really quickly when you lose I-75 and you have a slide and you lose the whole mountainside. Where do all those vehicles go? Where does the commercial traffic go? And right now we're working along State Route 29, US 27 through Roane, Morgan County, trying to develop the rest of that strategic corridor. It has redundancy for our system. It also provides economic growth. It provides safety and all those things. But they're very expensive projects. We got one now. I can't remember the price. It's about $60 million. It's a very short section, but $60 million. The mountains, the terrain, the power ride, all the things that you challenge. So a lot of needs. So
good, thank you. And so talking 11 billion when you 6 billion backlog and a new needs of 5 more billion, a lot of money. Jeff, you want to just address?
His wish list was probably
right. Yeah. Jeff has that list.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to apologize first off because if I don't say a project that you all want, there's just too many projects out there. I can't list them all. They'd be, hundreds of pages long, and TDOT has those. We have our own list, and you have your own list of projects. But I think first and foremost, from our perspective, we're looking at trying to improve the safety and operation of our transportation system. And when we look at the interstates, we see the biggest needs on our interstate interchanges, such as Merchants Drive, Emery Road, I-640, 75, 275, even Campbell Station Road. Then you go off the interstate, you look at Hardin Valley and Pellissippi Parkway. You look at Oak Ridge Highway and Pellissippi Parkway. And you look at Solway community, that connection through there. These are huge critical intersections of our transportation system that we really need to be addressed, primarily because it's a safety perspective, because traffic is backing up on the interstate. You go off, therefore, creating an opportunity for serious incidents. Once you go off of that interstate, you have Alcoa Highway, a $250 million plus probably investment over the next 10 years. That's $250 million. over the next 10 years. Chapman Highway, operational and safety improvements really need to be invested in that corridor. Look at North Shore Drive, the growth that is occurring out there. Our area has grown from an urbanized area from over 100 square miles in the last 10 years. Our population has increased 35% in the last 10 years, spreading out, and we expect to have about 300,000 more people and 240,000 new jobs in this area. If we do not invest in that transportation infrastructure, we are going to be so far behind. And just a plug, looking at where that investment be, we are competing with states all around us. Arkansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, Virginia, and Georgia all have done strategies to increase transportation revenue. We may be number 4 or 5 in the country right now. If we don't invest soon, we'll be much further behind. So I can go on with the list of projects, but that just hits the big ones that we need to look at where our key congestion, where our safety points are. And as Steve indicated, it's across all modes of transportation. Our aging population, in less than 10 years, 20% of us are going to be 65 years older. We'll be driving longer, but can we drive safely, or can we drive at all? We need to be looking at opportunities for individuals that cannot drive or cannot afford to drive, how they will be mobile and still be productive in this economy. So we're talking about economic growth, but also quality of life in this transportation investment.
Perfect. So a lot of need.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Is there any chance that some form of transportation, rail or something else, could alleviate the demand, or just put it all on the roads?
We've looked at ways to invest in opportunities for light rail or something of that nature. Yeah, we got hills, we got very narrow valleys, which does make an opportunity to be strategic in that investment, but it's so expensive to invest in light rail. I think you're better off in a community our size right now with rubber-wheeled fixed transit, fixed route service, and have a lot of service up and down the major corridors. 15-minute headways is really good for public transportation at the minimum. And then if you can build feeder routes into those, that would be great.
All right, we've identified a lot of need, $11 billion worth. The question becomes, how do you pay for it? Eddie, I know you introduced a bill that would take some of the current surplus, put it back into the Highway Trust Fund, because that money was taken out for use for other things a few years ago. You, I think, you did 150 million?
130.
130, all right. And your original bill was more than
261.
261. Then the governor came back with a smaller amount to put back into the fund. So where does that stand right now in the legislature?
We had that bill drafted back in the summer once we realized how much of a surplus we were going to end up with. In the 14-15 budget, I believe the surplus was about right at $400 million. The surplus it looks like we're going to have this year is another about $600 million. So the surplus we're talking about right now is almost $1 billion. It's about $958 million is the surplus we're talking about in the state. So, repaying that money that was taken out between 2001 when Sunquist was in office and 2007 Bredesen to balance the state budget came out to about $290 million total. We've paid about $29 million of that back, leaving $261 million. After the governor went through all of the needs across the state, when you look at higher education, K through 12, some of the state buildings that need to be done, repaying the money to TDOT, they allocated $130 million in the budget to start repaying TDOT. He's committed, if we can't do the rest of it this year, that will be in there next year. So we will get the money repaid in the next 2 years. And what that amounts to for TDOT is that's an immediate cash infusion they will have to be able to start doing some of these projects. That's immediate money they can start drawing down some of the federal matching funds for, or some of the funds that they just need on the local level to start doing that. But if you look at the 11.4, it's a total of $11.4 billion of backlog project list. TDOT's budget is about $1.84 billion. Just simple math, and I could talk for a while because we've had these budget presentations for a while. It's going to, I think, about 2060 was when they would finish that list at the current funding. 2060. I may not be alive when they get done with some of those projects. So it's incumbent upon us to look at what are we going to do? How do we fix the funding mechanism? If you look at the trend line that Steve was talking about, the miles driven versus how much more fuel fuel efficient our cars are now, just doing a straight up gas tax only has a short-term fix. So the discussion has to be on a long-term funding solution. And that's where we are right now. That's what we've got to start having the discussion of. Another thing that's coming on the market, and I know everybody's thinking, Jetsons, this is way off, but piloted cars, autonomous cars, you say, well, that's 20 years off. I drove in one last week that took me down the interstate. They literally let go of the steering wheel. It went into the dash. The car drove. It avoided all other cars around us. That's 4 years away from market. I could get in my car in Knoxville, get up to about 35 miles an hour, turn the piloted car on, have the GPS set for my destination in Nashville. The steering wheel goes in and I can work and the car drives to Nashville. So that is coming down the yes. Most days, yay. No, but the safety mechanism, if you take your seatbelt off, the car will automatically pull over to the road, so that you have to keep all the safety aspects in. But then Google is working on a car that will pick you up at your house, drive you around town, take you to your destination, drop you off. So Mayor O'Hara was in my office the other day, and we talked about, there's probably going to be a time in the next 20 years where you may not own a car yourself. You call, a car picks you up at your place, takes you. So, we're moving to that kind of technology. But as we do, it becomes more about the different fuel types. That may be electric, it may be hydrogen. Well, right now we don't tax those. So how do we set up the entire solution moving into the future so that we can maintain the infrastructure we're going to have, but we're not relying on just gasoline to get us there? So that's the discussion that's starting to take place now. And I know that was kind of a big circle, but it all fits in together just so you can kind of understand what's going on and behind the scenes and how we're all having those discussions.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I guess the question, are there other bills similar to Eddie's? Are you relying on the governor's budget to put that 130 back in? Are there any attempts to increase that number to what Eddie had originally done? But what's going on behind the scenes in the Transportation Committee?
Well, the budget, Susan, is difficult. It's really harder when you have excess money than when you have no money, because as you can imagine, every individual, every organization is wanting some of that surplus. So Representative Smith, who's by the way doing a great job, has proposed putting back, frankly, what was taken out of. And we never want to be like the federal government. I love Bob Griffin. He's sitting right here, and he's one of my heroes. But they're one of the few, maybe the only, that we can really trust in that whole group up there, because what the federal government does is either take out of or they borrow forward, and we don't ever want to do that in Tennessee. Constitutionally, of course, we can't, but the budget is really going to be a challenge this year because there's so many folks who want part of it. So what Representative Smith has proposed is hopefully what's going to ultimately happen. Candidly, I'm in favor of putting it all back. We took it all out. Why not put it all back? Now, whether we do that the first year or the second year will be debated. So that's a big part of what will happen. And let me digress to thank the individuals here, the elected officials. I know now, after 10 years of this, what they go through, both on the local level, state level, in the communities, in the school boards, and the commissioners. So thanks to you. And then the business community. I'm a part of that world. That's really where I've lived the last 40 years. And to you people who are creating jobs, taking risks, hiring employees, and investing your time, that's really what's exciting about our country and our state, is we have people like you who are saying, we can make tomorrow better than today. And we do that by doing the right things and being a part of going forward, not looking behind us. Susan, a couple of things that I guess would be interesting to this group, along with what Eddie said earlier. This week, and we talk every week about certain issues, certain things that happen in certain proposals. He spoke to the autonomous car, which is pretty neat, by the way. It's fascinating how that could work with sensors surrounding the car and the ability, if you're having a seizure, for the car to know that. It pulls over, calls 911. All these things we thought were on the Jetson show long ago is now kind of happening here today. We had a presentation, representative, on Tuesday of a congestion alternative. This specific one would be from Murfreesboro to Nashville, allowing public transportation buses to use the emergency lane. If you can imagine going down the interstate in Knoxville, potentially, or in Chattanooga or in Nashville, where congestion is such an issue, if it's a public transportation vehicle, they would have the right to ride on the shoulder, given the road was adequate and there's no police car in front or no abandoned car. They could go no more than 35 miles an hour. So we're trying to think kind of outside the box. There's been proposals to bring rail down the center of the highway, where now we have excess land down the middle of interstate areas, kind of connecting areas, such as Knoxville to Atlanta or Knoxville to Charlotte, or even in local way. We have a rail system.
DC corridor, don't you? They have a center link.
Right.
Suburbs into the city.
We do a rail service between Lebanon, Tennessee and downtown Nashville to move people, and a lot of folks use that because we really are, as has been said before by Steve and Jeff both, we really are in a quandary. You know, we like the fact that we are so highly rated in transportation across the nation. We like the fact we're debt-free. We really like the fact that we want our roads to be safe. But the thing that resonates to this group and to most of us is, how do we go forward recruiting new industry, bringing in new jobs, if we don't have the infrastructure in which to do that? If we don't have the ability to have people come into our area to connect up from their home to their work, to their shopping, to their church, you know, how does all that grow in our terms? So it's a big concern of ours moving forward. How do we fill that funding gap? And Bob, thanks again to the Congress and to the congressman who chairs that committee on transportation. For the first time in several years, we're allowed to have a federal funding bill, which gives us a little bit of certainty in our state and the funding that we get from the federal government. And when we talk about that, we sometimes forget that flows down to your county. And to the commissioners here, you understand what happens in D.C. and flows through Nashville ultimately winds up in your county. So when we talk about dollars, 40% of all the dollars we receive come back to the county. So it's really, truly a local issue. We talked about a couple other things, I guess, are going to be, right? We talked also about hands-free phones, new bill that was proposed this week, which will, if successful and passed, would demand that you no longer could use your phone to utilize or text. In theory, you'd go to Bluetooth. If you're like me and you still have a flip phone, and you just simply put in the cradle and put it on the dash of the car. Statistics are showing how that is tragically increasing accidents, loss of life. Other issues I think we talked about were bicycle lanes interacting with transportation. Jeff has been on the forefront of that. A lot of you in the room have been very responsible for how we can go and allow people to utilize the road, but there's a lot of pushback to that. And in particular, there's a bill from one of our colleagues from Chattanooga, which would basically defund the abilities that TDOT has now to put bicycle lanes along the road. And that could be a question later on that we come back to, and Eddie and I can kind of talk about the debate going back and forth of how that would work. So, you know, we're responsible not just for roads and bridges. We have an airplane section in TDOT. We have a rail section in TDOT. So we really have a multi-usage of transportation, how that works. I see John here from university. You know, we talked this week about no helmets on motorcycles. We go through a lot of these issues that just come up in the sphere of transportation that may evoke some questions later on, and we have things that are ultimately touch you every day, not just how your car drives and how safe the roads are, but ultimately what speed limits are, how many vehicles have to have seatbelts. We had a law proposed proposed on Tuesday that would make it now illegal for you not to wear a seatbelt in certain vehicles. And you say, well, gosh, Jimmy, I thought it was always illegal not to wear a seatbelt. Well, as it found out in the statute, we had exempted years ago certain vehicles. Those of you who have a GMC Suburban, Denali, a Ford Excursion, an F-350 truck, a Dodge Dually, you hadn't been by law bound to wear seatbelts for all these years. Nobody really knew that. Yeah, ultimately. So anyway, we're trying to close that gap and make it consistent across the state, consistent across the law that everyone would have to do that. So those are a few of the things we've talked about, and we can take a question or two if you'd like.
That bicycle bill or the funding, taking away funding from the bicycle lanes and trails, I think over here that would not be a very popular idea because we've obviously spent a lot of time and effort on greenways and bike trails, and so we certainly want to follow that. I guess we've identified the need. We know there's $11 billion need. Eddie and your committee both are talking about a short-term fix, putting some of the money back into the fund. What's long-term? One of you mentioned that a gas tax may not be sufficient for the long term. What is the solution then? I'd be curious from all of you what you see is how we identify or how we fund this $11 billion need. If it's not a tax, and we know that's never popular, but I do sense that there is more support for increasing the gas tax than I would have suspected.
Well, and I'll allow these other men to weigh in on this one. I will tell you in my district, Susan, because I represent Loudoun and Monroe, which are more you would consider rural, who have been in the past very hesitant to even consider the word gas tax. It's been surprising to me as I go out and try to listen, and I told the governor a few months ago when he came through, I think in this room as a matter of fact, talked about his listening tour, and many of you were there, and I said, well, Governor, I've got a very unscientific listening tour. I go to Hardee's in Sweetwater, and I start at about 5 o'clock, and I just walk around the tables of all these, I call them old cods, these farmers, these old guys, and I just say to them for every issue that comes up, how do you think about this? What's your thoughts? And I'll be frank with you, I've been surprised at how receptive they are once explained, once kind of brought up to speed on where we are, and their openness. If you kind of rephrase that term from fuel tax to investment economic revenue, and you describe to them all the things that's just been mentioned here, and you tell them, what do you want us to look like in 10 years or in 20 years? And you say to them, if we're going to bring in plants to Vano or plants to Corrington or jobs to South Knoxville, how exactly do we do that if we don't have infrastructure, if we don't have water and sewer and roads? How do we maintain our abilities to grow? And you all know that we're poised in Tennessee in our abilities to be passed through by so many other businesses and tourists. We're in a perfect spot. How do we maintain that growth curve that we're on if we don't think ahead? And if you say to most of them, it's really a difference of $90 annually in many cases to what we can do. Almost nobody then would say, well, I couldn't do that or I wouldn't do that. If you tell them, compare the taxes you pay on fuel with what you pay for a cell phone or you pay for cable service or any other item you have to have, and if you think about consumption and it being the area in which we are asked to collect the fees, most people, frankly, are pretty open to the idea, as long as you provide for them, okay, do something about electric vehicles, which are paying nothing now. Do something about certain trailers, which are contributing nothing now. Just make it fair. Make it consistent across the board. Make trucks pay a heavier, and they're willing to do that, by the way. They have come to us and said, we want our fees to go up. They know what it's like to have good roads. They understand what it's like to move commerce, and they're very much in favor of a much higher rate than the governor frankly proposed. He hasn't come out with an actual percent, but they, of all people, want to lead that discussion. So I think there's an openness to do it. I think there's a willingness to do it, and there's certainly a need to do it. So I see it, and don't record me as a yes vote yet, okay? But I am very much encouraged that the people are open. They're thinking this through, and I think that's a good thing for us.
Eddie, what about your district?
Well, and the same as Chairman Matlock, as I went around this summer and fall doing many town halls around the district, once I explained it, the answer came back, well, there's no other solution, just make it the least amount it has to be. The one thing that I always start with is every penny of a gas tax increase amounts to $30 million on the state level. 60% of that stays with TDOT. 38% flows to your local community, and 2% goes to the general fund. We talked about some legislation, and Chairman Matlock mentioned about the trucking industry. There's a bill out there, it's a weight distance bill that will raise the amount that trucks that put the most wear and tear on the roads. That's got about a $200 million a year positive impact going into TDOT.
With trucks? No.
Do what now?
Does a penny do that with trucks?
No, the penny is a little different on trucks, just because of the way it's the way the fuel tax works on the trucking industry. They pay into what is called the International Fuel Tax, IFTA, and it's based on the miles driven in a state. So just because you bought your gasoline in North Carolina, but you drove 300 miles across, yes, so you pay. That's why they do the log books. All that goes into IFTA, and then that tax flows to the state where the miles are driven. So that's kind of how that works on the long haul trucks. So, we've got to look at all those solutions. But then, as the chairman said, hybrid and electric cars right now, electric cars pay nothing for what I call the user fee for the roads. We all pay a user fee. It's called a tax. But if you look at that 21.4 cents, which is the state portion of the tax, again, keep in mind, of that 21.4 cents, 60% is what TDOT's working with. 38% goes back to our local communities, and 2% is going into the general fund. There's been a bill that I've heard that somebody's got that is closing that 2%. That money will not go to the general fund. It will go back to TDOT. So that's a little bit of an increase there. But then when we look at the fact that by 2050, Toyota has said that they are going to move away from gasoline-powered cars. Their entire fleet is going to move to hydrogen. So let's look at hydrogen. How are we going to tax that? Let's look at propane. Let's look at some of the other alternative fuels that are starting to come on the market, and how do we set those up so that everybody's paying, as the chairman said, an equal fee. That's part of the larger discussion. That's why I said just a gas tax increase isn't going to solve a long-term solution. We've got to look at everything in that realm and how we're going to solve that moving forward. Another bill that was proposed, I believe it was by Representative Barry Doss, and this one is basically, it's kind of like mine, only mine repays TDOT. He wants to just take $100 million of the surplus and divide that up across the 95 counties in the state. If you do the simple math, that's a little over $1 million per county. I know it won't break down that way. Bob, Thomas, you're in here somewhere. How many miles did Knox County pave last year, and how much did it cost?
We're paving about 20 miles a year with 2,000 paved roads in the county. And I don't have the cost figures.
Yeah. Just with the money that they get, that 38%, that flows down, they've paved 20 miles out of 2,000. So it's going to take, 100 years to pave all of Knox County roads at that rate. So that's where you have to explain to everybody and have them understand what's going on. You've got to set the ground floor so everybody's working from the same understanding before they want to have a discussion about anything else.
Yes.
I have a question. talk about the $11 billion. Can you break out how much would be from the federal and how much would be DOT have to pay out of that $11 billion, and how long would it take to spend it?
Well, I'll take a very quick crack at it. Depending on those needs are, typically on the interstate system, it's an 80% federal share and a 20% state share, looking at that. On your major urban arterials, again, if the federal funding is there, it's an 80-20 split. Then once you get off these major roadways, it can be 100% state dollars in a lot of cases, or 100% local dollars that are put into that. And these needs that are identified here that's talked about are primarily just those major state highways and our interstate systems. Getting down to local collectors and local needs are not even addressed by this $11 billion shortfall, whatever.
TDOT need $2 billion
To match.
Yeah. If you're looking at that type of breakdown on the match, it would be. And here's our challenge too, and just to speaking to that, we have two sets of funding, as Chairman and Representative Smith both said. You've got the federal side and you've got the state side. And when you look at our reoccurring costs and how, things like maintenance, I'm taking $340-something million just in maintenance, resurfacing and maintenance that goes out of that state funds. What happens to us and the struggle that we're having, and we were fortunate to have a new FAST Act bill that's going to give us, for us that was great. When you're trying to look at projects that have a duration of 8 years to get them to contract, having a known amount of money coming from the federal side finally, instead of reoccurring extensions on an old bill, it really helps us a lot in our planning. But when you look at what's happened on the state side, the discretionary dollars that we have is shrinking very, very fast. Around 2004, somewhere right around there, the way we were doing business with most of our resurfacing on our state routes was 100% state funded. We basically ran out of state dollars. It went to zero to be able to match things. So what we had to do is recalculate how we did things, change our structure a little bit. We started doing resurfacing with STP funds, taking some federal money to be able to do that in different areas, to be able to supplement our resurfacing, to get the 80-20 match, which that helped us a lot. And that got us back to about that $50 million mark of discretionary funds. Things that come out of that, a lot of that state aid programs, which a lot of our counties, if you're in a county around, you know that we have the state aid system that works. The other thing is the SIA program, which is huge. We talk about the investment of our infrastructure. The state of Tennessee is in a very unique place. It's a crossroads for the nation. And when you look at where people live and how people travel and just-in-time delivery, we have the greatest opportunity. We've seen the influx of industry coming here. Like, it's just unbelievable what has come here. And a lot of it's because we have a good transportation system, that we can supply that. So as you go forward and look at that, you have the SIA program, which is a program that State and Industrial Access Road program. It's 100% state funds, but what we do is a DENZO comes in. We're able to maybe invest $5 million. They do a $500 million investment, and they hire $280 million a year worth of wages of people out of that investment. It attracts that business. Those are some of the things that come out of those matches. Now, what has happened, the challenge is, as you've looked, because of the matching funds that we have to use on those state dollars, obviously, like Jeff said, if you've got 80% sitting here that I can get federal money and I have to get my 20%, I want to make sure I use that 20% to get the 80%. As we get closer where we're at now, I think this year we're probably at like $500,000 left by the time you fund all those programs. The challenge with the FAST Act is that around 2020, there'll be around $70 million on the table that the way we are right now, I may not be able to get to because there's not enough state funding left to match that money. So it's really, it's a really critical thing as we try to restructure and do what we're doing. And we try to be a very efficient agency. I mean, when you look at what TDOT does, you've probably heard before. I mean, we're a debt-free state, which is great. There's not many states that do that. We don't owe anything on our roads. We typically are rated in the top 5. we have a 2% admin fee. I was talking with some guys from AT&T earlier there that we were having that discussion. We try to get every dollar we can and squeeze that out and get that into a community to make a difference. But those are some challenges as that discretionary state funding goes down. It gets more and more difficult to match those federal funding opportunities.
Other questions, John?
Yeah, this is a question for Mr. Barnes. According to Matt Barnes out of your Nashville office, he did a little research for me and said that all projects let to contract in calendar years 2015 and 2014, 27% of that fund went to Hamilton County. As a county commissioner who wants to see something happen to North Shore Drive improvement, is TDOT going to continue to take a large portion of their construction budget and pick out one select county to spend on?
Okay, it's not picked out by Slate County. It's and it's very cyclical. Right now, in Chairman Matlock's area in Loudoun County, there's $78 million under construction. In Knox County right now, we have $140 million under construction, but I just and we awarded $100 million this week, Alcoa Highway and the 640 interchange. So when you look at the total numbers, you will have cyclical times where you'll have peaks. In Hamilton County, there's a lot of money in Hamilton County right now because there was a big project. We had Smart Fix downtown in Knoxville, which at the time was the largest project in the history of the state, so it was $200 million. These projects are so expensive, when you're talking about a $40 million project, a $50 million project, a $70 or $80 million project. So if you go to a community and you build a project in Hamlin County or in Washington County or somewhere, at that time you'll see a spike in a year. Over time, you'll see that evens out. Like right now, as the Alcoa Highway projects come online, we were tickled to death. If you're around me and Amanda and Danny very often, we're very passionate about what we do. I mean, transportation, I've done this for 25 years. When I go on trips with my wife, she calls me her pocket protector husband because I'm a geek. It's a field trip. I'm going to say, hey, let's go by and look at this bridge. Or, man, over here, they're building this transportation. And they're like, oh, look, them kids are in the back going, rolling their eyes at me. We love what we do. And so for us, here at Alcoa Highway is a corridor that's very important to us. And this year, this last letting, we got to let the first phase of something that we've been trying to get there for a long time. It's very expensive. That corridor is going to be more than $250 million. It's probably going to be somewhere 270 or 280, I guess, Danny. Probably somewhere in that or more. Could be more.
On that, Steve, Alcoa.
The one we got under contract now is at 19 for completion.
Yeah, summer 19.
Summer 19 for the section we have right now. Obviously, there are 7 projects on that corridor. 7 of them, going all the way out from the airport all the way back to Cherokee Drive. Those are very expensive projects. For us, that's a big win for us. We got that one underway. Getting the last phase of 640 interchange at Broadway. I drive that every day. That's all going to be fixed that other side now. And as Jeff talked about, the congestion on the interstates, we've got so many interchanges that we have identified as we work together in our partnership that need to be done. Emory Road, the Ramp Q projects that we've done that are really important. But they're really big projects. And so what you see in a long story is that at any given time when a corridor goes online, it gets ready for funding and funding's available, you'll see spikes in certain areas. Then you may see for a period of time that those totals are lower. When we built I-26 in Upper East Tennessee, during a certain period of time, that Upper East Tennessee corridor had a lot of money spent in it because we were building I-26 through the mountain. Very expensive project, very, very high dollar corridor. You see that money start dropping as that one came online and it was finished, and then other projects in other areas. Does that help understand? That's kind of how it works.
Yeah, I was going to ask Steve a question, maybe something else to weigh in, but if you look out 20 years and there's all this growth, what do you do in these major city corridors? I mean, there isn't that much room to build new roads. You're double-decking America. What do you do to deal with a growth pattern in a congested area that really can't have more roads in terms of quantity as opposed to some rural county which has a lot of land base to go around?
Right. you look at other alternatives, and some of that we've hit on is multimodal access, using buses. No, I don't know about bicycles, cheeseburger. I can't bicycle that far anymore. But you talked about your bus routes. One of the most efficient ways to move people when you talk about money, because rail is extremely, like Jeff said, is extremely expensive. Yeah, but buses, you're able to do that, and we're a part of that process. The other thing is intelligent transportation system. Being better at making use of what you have. We have everybody's seen the yellow trucks, right? Anybody ever been helped by a yellow truck in here? Nobody? Yeah. But we have an intelligent transportation system. You have the incident response out there to help clear things really quickly, to help people that are on the side of the road. But you also have an intelligent transportation system. We're monitoring cameras. We can try to make, it's a very small investment money-wise, but we can improve efficiency of the road or the investment we have. So those are other ways. You have lots of tools in your toolbox that you pull out and try to make what you have work better. And there's also corridor management studies. We go through and do signalization coordination, and then you're able to get better efficiency along a corridor. Absolutely. And then sometimes it changes the way access is made. We choose access management and parallel corridors with local streets, and all of a sudden you get a lot better throughput. So. Absolutely.
All right. 9 o'clock. Okay.
And one last question. I guess one of you mentioned the bill to not use TDOT money to fund bike lanes. I'm a person opposed to it, and just like your take, and where you see it going in the legislative session.
This is a city council.
Well, it is going to be a highly debated item. The bill that was proposed is put off for 2 weeks. So as happens in every other instance, your voice matters. And what you care about, we need to hear from. But I will tell you that idea came out of an issue in Chattanooga, and it really is a debate on two sides of the equation. It's number one, what's been mentioned earlier, is the importance of allowing people to use bike. I'm into the bike. I'm into the exercise side of it. I'm into the transportation side of it. But the other side argues this: tell us the revenue. Explain to us how bicycles contribute to these roads. So you have the other 95% of the people who would say the funding of that doesn't speak to allowing the additional lane for a bicycle. The safety does, certainly. But the funding part of it is how do we convince people who will never ride a bike, never use a bike, but pay a fee or a tax for those roads to be built, for those roads to be maintained, when the bicycle pays zero. So that kind of wraps up the arguments, I guess, from both pro and con. You see that similar, Eddie?
I do, and as I talked to say I got a few emails on that one this week would be an understatement. But I talked to several people here at home, and I just posed the question. I said, when you consider the fact that bicycles pay nothing for the roads, all of that, and again, keep in mind, and the question was asked of the gentleman that's leaving now, about the funding, because I wanted to go back and answer part of his question. It's a shrinking pool of money, but a growing need. So that's really the crossroads we're at. So I asked a few people that called, would bicyclists be willing to pay a wheel tax, if you will, to help fund some of this so that we can continue that investment. I'm opposed to taking away any bicycle lanes because it is a safety measure more than anything. So to answer your short question, I won't be supporting that bill based on what I've read so far. But again, it goes back to that larger discussion we've got to have of how do we continue to fund everything moving into the future.
We could be here 2 hours because there's so much interest in this issue, but I want to thank Representative Matlock and Representative Smith and Jeff and Steve. Thank you all so much for coming this morning.